Hello everybody, and I am so glad to have my friend Bart Loeser on Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this show, we're both in the same field of corporate training. That's what we do for our living as our vocation, and you travel the United States with teams and corporations, helping them to communicate and collaborate at higher levels. And that's my joy also. The reason why I wanted to ask you on to the show is because both of us are human beings who are growing human beings. And we have come up through this time. You were born in?
1960.
Okay, and I was born in 1948. Could you tell a little bit about your journey during that time so that we can I can learn a little bit about you as a male during this time. Tell me a little bit about Bart Loeser.
Well, it was certainly a very different world that I grew up in, even different from the world you grew up in. So I think it's fascinating to understand the differences between generations and what impacted us and made us who we are. And we were taught various different truths, at least that we believe to be truths, about how life is and how it must be and what it takes to be successful and to fit in. Which I believe as human beings is the one thing we all want more than anything, is just to feel like, not just to fit in, but to feel like we matter. And that's, I think every human being, if we could teach them that no matter who you are, what you bring to the table, you matter. And I think that's part of my message that I try to spread to people as I'm teaching them what I teach. And I'm very passionate and grateful to have the opportunities I do to get in front of a corporate audience who would never think to come and listen to the messages I teach, because I teach those interpersonal skills in the workplace, but I teach much more than that. I really like teaching people more the idea of what is the function of life? Why are we here? What is worthwhile? How do you find your path? How do you find happiness? Which is essentially what I try to teach people. Whether you're going to be happier at work or happier in your personal life. And I think that stems from my life, where I spent most of my life struggling with that question. How can I be happier? And if you had asked me at the age of 8, what do you want to do with your life? My answer was, at that time, all I want to do is to try to find a way to make people happier. Because I'd grown up in a group of people who seemed supremely unhappy, even though we had the basics. We were, fortunate. We were very middle class and very, we had a great life, but we were never happy. We had those moments of happiness. But in general, it seemed like we just were miserable. I'd mentioned a little earlier in our pre-talk that even though I grew up in Houston in the late 60s on, and my family's from that area 5 generations back, my dad had joined the Army to pay for his medical schooling at the year I was born. And so immediately I was born in El Paso because Dad was at Fort Bliss training there. Then my next brother was born less than a year later at Fort Hood. So we were in Houston, or in Texas a lot, but we were all over Texas. And then after my younger brother was born and we spent 2 years in San Antonio, then we moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, mostly because my parents had that as a choice. Do that, or my dad could get shipped off to a MASH unit in Vietnam. And he already had a friend there and knew how devastating that was. So he decided to move us all to Fairbanks. And it was a different type of devastation, I think, in some ways, because even though my mother she was very close to her family, she never felt comfortable being away from that support system she had. And when she lost that support system for that year and a half and had to live in an environment where sometimes you couldn't even go outside, you couldn't, it was hard to interact with people, she didn't know people well, and she was not very outgoing in that sense. And so it was difficult for her. Plus she had 3 little boys who were always trying to kill each other constantly. We were just small kids all a year apart. And it just drove her to the edge. And for a period of, from that time in 1967, her first breakdown, for the next, at least 10 or 15 years of our lives, I never knew from one day to the next whether she was going to decide to live or she was going to kill herself. And growing up like that.
Your heart. Exactly. Were you the caretaker?
Well, being the middle child, and all 3 of us dealt with it differently. And that's, and my mother would get questions like that from people because later on when I became an AIDS activist, and certainly was openly gay at that point. And my parents had come to an understanding of it, and they actually, and I'm very proud of this, that they got very involved later in life and became presidents of PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays.
God, that is an amazing process.
My parents were amazing, yeah.
To be gay during those years, how did you come to the consciousness of I'm a gay man, or a gay adolescent, or what?
I was a gay kid. By the age of 6 or 7, a lot of gay children, especially boys, know clearly that the feelings that they may have toward a male figure is clearly not appropriate, because you learn from society what is appropriate, how you should feel, and you're thinking, no one's talking about these feelings I'm having.
Wow.
And so what you learn at an early age is you don't share that with anyone. So you hide everything. And I remember even in the 6th grade, 5th grade, learning how to walk and talk the way I thought a male should talk, try to talk with it. Even at that age of 11, trying to have a deep voice, making sure I walked in a masculine way, that I didn't run like a girl, things like this. And being totally panicked that at any moment someone might discover. And of course, boys all the time are accusing other boys of being gay, and so that was the worst thing that someone could be accused of, so I was always trying to hide it, because you knew what would happen at that time. So it was a very different age, which it's not anything the way it is today, but certainly then you knew you don't share it with anyone, and you don't talk about it, and you hide it. And what I'd hoped was maybe what happens is once you hit puberty, it changes.
Yeah.
Because
the
they always
easy
talk about
time, right?
Yeah. Well, they talk about how young boys, little boys always hate little girls, and then, but at one point, it'll turn around, and then you can't stop thinking about them. Well, that never happened to me. It never changed. Now I did start thinking about boys in a very different way, or men, in certain types.
Starting to get when the hormones hit, and we begin to have that.
When you have a reaction to a male figure, wait a minute, that's not normal. That's not okay, and you're told by all of society not only that it's not normal, but something can happen to you if if anyone finds out.
Exactly.
You can be ruined.
If you toss into that, because to me, that gets into the shame. And when we and shame is that place where it really gets us into dysfunction for me. Every time I'm in a shame consciousness, it's devastating emotionally.
Shame is never a helpful emotion, one that just makes you feel less than, that you don't belong, that you don't deserve, that you're not worthy,
and it infects everything.
Oh yes.
So there are, and that's where. All right. So how did you work through that? When did you begin to meet people or see that you were not alone?
Well, there are lots of, everybody responds differently to situations. And even in the childhood situation, when I was growing up, I mentioned my mother was asked a question, well, why do you think your son is gay? They were trying to get to that somehow she had done something. And they were looking for, what did you do? You weren't the right kind of mother. Maybe you were too smothering, or the father wasn't there for you and such. And she was going, well, perhaps you can answer this question to me. I have 3 boys. Only one of them is gay. And they're all a year apart. They were raised in the same environment, and they had the same things happen to them. And all 3 of them responded in very different ways, which is true. All 3 of us responded completely different. My older brother became the rebel, got into drugs, was the one who was doing everything that he wasn't supposed to do. My younger brother, he threw himself into school and his friends and isolated himself from the house by living his life outside. And I did the opposite of that. I isolated myself within and had learned at the age of, I was 11 at the time when I had some of the worst of the abuse I got from the kids. And in the 6th grade, I had this incident that happened where I was beat up in a classroom right at the end of the break for Christmas break. And after I was beat up and they had destroyed the gifts I'd given to, I got this great gift for somebody that you had to exchange. He destroyed it. Everyone laughed and they all left the classroom to leave for spring break or Christmas break. And I was devastated by that. And they had, knocked me down and kicked me and stuff when the teacher was not there. And and then just left the room laughing. And then a boy comes in and he's consoling me and saying, yeah, they treated you so awfully. And he's patting me on the back and saying how horrible it was and they shouldn't have done it. And I thought, wow, wow, somebody actually understands. Somebody's, maybe they're not all awful people. And so one of the things that I didn't realize was at that time he had chalk erasers on the back of his hand, and he was actually hitting me on the back of the head and my shirt with chalk. And then he left with a good laugh, and after that, if I could have gotten a gun and blown them all away, I probably would have. And I dreamed of that for years, getting revenge on them. But I decided at that moment, that's it.
Or take it internally and to say, okay, well, if I can't do that, I can go ahead and check out.
Well, that's what I did. I decided then I will trust no one. And that was the lesson I learned, was I will have no friends, no associations with people. And so from that point on, until I was, a senior in high school, when I made any attempt to connect with people, I was a loner.
Yeah.
If you had known me back then, I would not be the person you see today. But that was how I chose to deal with it, because I realized you can't trust anyone, and thus I will just isolate myself in life and just survive.
Wow. So how did you, tell me, what was the next step of the story? Because one of the things that I know about you, and I know, is that you have a deep compassion. You have a deep compassion. You have worked in the HIV and AIDS research and in helping in the activism, and this is all part of your compassion for it. So how do you get there? What are the interesting spots along the way that you can give me some insights into how the resilience of the human being?
Well, one lesson I learned that was interesting was when my mother told me that your senior year is the best year of your life. And she knew I was a loner and I had no friends. And in my junior yearbook, I was not even in it. I think maybe I might have had a junior year picture, but it's as if I didn't exist, which I was more than happy of being a ghost at that point. It kept me safe all those years. But I realized I didn't want that. I wanted to be popular.
Right.
And I was about as far from popular as one could be. And I decided to take my mother's word seriously, and I decided I'm going to create a fake person. I'm going to create somebody who's fun, outgoing, and who everyone looks up to.
Yeah.
That's who I wanted to be. So my senior year, I decided to join every organization in the school that the school pretty much had to offer. I wanted to be on student council, which you can only be if you get elected. So I'm not going to get elected. I'm a ghost at that school. And so I decided, well, there's one other way, is you could be the president of a student organization. Well, how's that going to happen? Well, actually, there was a club that didn't exist, the science club. And so I decided I'm going to take on that club and I'm going to build it into something. So even though science is the last thing that I'm good at, I decided to be the president of this club, and my goal was to get on make all these announcements on at the school, and I loved having that chance to do it. Yeah. And I'd always make these announcements about the meetings of the science club. Come join us. We're going to do more than any other club in the school's history. We will make a mark that will change your life forever. I'd give these speeches like this, and we built the club up to like 20 kids who joined this club. And they elected me the president, and then I was on student council. And my dad had a Suburban, so I could take 12 kids all over the place. So we were doing field trips to NASA, because we were in Houston at that point. So we're going to NASA, Armand Bayou. We went to Dickens on the Strand when it was brand new, and it's now this giant event. But back then it was new. We went to the Renaissance Festival when that was new. I took people everywhere saying, well, this is historic science. This is this kind of science. We'd do experiments on the school campus. And I just created this character that was always doing something interesting, trying to dance madly so that people wouldn't see that I'm actually not that person.
Yeah.
So I created.
But there was aspects of you that was that person, right? I mean,
it
there
took
are parts
me years
of
to
us
learn that, because I thought I was completely fake. I thought if they really knew who I was, they wouldn't like me. They only like me because they think I'm this popular person.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then after I graduated, and my picture was everywhere. I mean, you look in the yearbook, I'm all over the yearbook. Of course, it didn't hurt to be on the yearbook group. So,
sure.
But I was certainly one to. I looked very popular then.
Exactly.
And then I went on to UT in this giant environment in Austin and became invisible again.
This is 1978?
This is 1978. Yeah.
Okay, and so there you are. And so what was the race consciousness of the United States for gay men in 1978 and in Austin, Texas in 1978?
It was just beginning to change. We were becoming much more visible. This is when Harvey Milk got elected in San Francisco.
And by the way, what, like 6, 7 times he failed before he actually got elected. So it's not like it was just
an openly gay man, though. And people say, well, it's San Francisco. Well, at that time, not even in San Francisco could a gay man get elected.
Thank you.
And he did. And then, what was it, a year or so later is when he was murdered, which was in 1978, which just says,
and this
there
is
you go,
Stonewall,
you're open,
right?
you're out. Oh, no, well, Stonewall is in 1969.
69.
That was when the riot was,
okay, good. All right, help me with dates as I'm going. Continue.
This is actually the 50th anniversary of Stonewall this year. So this is, it's an interesting time because a lot of people who are out and gay today don't know what was going on back then. And this was your generation. People who were, when they were in their 20s and living in New York, and the only place they could meet anyone, and it was safe, was you could go to a gay bar and actually meet somebody that you're attracted to and could connect with. And so it was an interesting time, but also at that time, the police and others knew they could harass us and get away with it. And so they would constantly come to the bars and harass people. And back then, they not only would arrest you if you were drunk or resisting arrest or any excuse possible.
Exactly.
But then your name would get printed in the paper for having been arrested at this gay bar. So if you were in a relationship with a woman or if you had a job, they could find out and you could easily be fired. So we could easily be harassed.
Yes.
And that's why in that evening in June, I think it was June 30th of 1969, which was the day that Judy Garland got buried. So these drag queens in this bar in New York were doing a show to express their sorrow about the death of their
and
queen,
the celebration of Judy Garland,
who meant so much to them. And because she's this tragic figure who also needed help, and we would reach out to her because she was so talented, and yet she didn't believe in herself at all.
Who does that remind us of?
Yes, I know. And someone with that much talent who doesn't think they're worthwhile. And how that drove her entire life. All the decisions she made was because of that. And even in the end, she didn't think her life mattered at all. And yet so many people loved her. And it didn't matter, it seemed, because it wasn't a matter of how much they loved her. She couldn't love herself.
Bart. Yeah.
And that's one of the common themes that, of course, a lot of gay people, we can't love ourselves. Look what society, they don't even love us.
Yeah.
And we can't love ourselves. So when our idol, who expresses what's been our lives too, dies, they're having this moment of deep grief and making the most of this and dealing with it. And that's when the police decided they're going to raid the bar. And they had enough. And so when they started to arrest them, somebody stood up and said, no, we're not going to this is not going to happen. Then the news started spreading out in the neighborhood, and then suddenly police cars were being overturned and burned. They're not going to keep doing this to us anymore. And they burned places in New York for a week. It was a big riot. It's not a celebration. This was a riot.
Yeah.
But it was the first biggest time where we truly stood up and said, we will not stand for this.
Were you in 78 in Austin? You were aware of this?
Well, I was.
That it happened?
We didn't know much about gay history at that point.
Okay, so
I had to learn about that.
All right, so you were here. So talk about this, because this is a time when there was, in pre-AIDS, there was very little consequences.
Well, let's talk about what happened from 1969 on.
Would you please?
Yeah, because from Stonewall on, gay people started standing up for themselves more and saying, wait a minute, we do matter. We do have value, especially in the big cities. So starting with the celebration of having pride, so starting the first Pride Parade.
Yes.
And then doing that on an annual basis and letting gay people know we are okay. And then in 1978, a movie came out called Making Love. And that was a movie that really impacted my life. I think it was 78. I'm trying to remember when it was. No, that was in the early 80s. So it was in 81. But during this period in the media, gay people started finally, for the first time, having roles in movies and in TV shows that were positive characters, not characters who were drunks or people who wanted to kill themselves.
Billy Crystal on Soap
Exactly.
right?
That was a major
That was the first time you had a major character
who was, he wasn't, I wouldn't call him
on a
normal,
sitcom.
but he was lovable and his family acknowledged him.
Acknowledged and accepted it, exactly.
Yeah. So it was the first time that we were speaking out and being able to say we do matter, and then society started accepting us.
Exactly.
And we were becoming more and more exposed, building on our self-esteem, being much more open in society. People were seeing, gosh, there are a lot of gay people. Where'd they all come from? Well, we've always been there. We just never shared that with anyone.
Right. So there's a difference between the foreground, background.
Mm-hmm. So now you could, by the time in '78, there were gay bars that you could go to that didn't get rated. That you didn't have to, you had to be careful,
Sure.
but you didn't have to fear that your life and your career would be destroyed if it was discovered.
Yeah.
That had changed in just 10 years.
And had you come out to your family then?
Oh, I was barely coming out to myself at that point. And so in 1981 was the first time I ever got the courage to even interact with a male.
Yeah.
Because I thought, I can't even deal with this. So when I finally did and had met someone in 1981, I guess we were seeing each other for a few times, but I was so uncomfortable with myself, I couldn't deal with that. And even the second person that I started dating with took me to a concert, and I found out after the concert we went to that his cousins who went with us knew that I was his date. I was so appalled, I broke up with him at that moment. How dare you tell somebody about us? And so it's like I was that embarrassed, and I'm a little bit ashamed that I did that at that time.
No,
but that's
but
how
still,
much.
But you know, the thing about this though, Bart, is that this is you can't take anything out of history. Mm-hmm. And when we grow up with that those kinds of race mind consciousnesses. Mm-hmm. That this is all right or it is not all right, it is very difficult for us to break through with it. I, like you, I just knew I liked little girls when I was a kid. There was no choice about it. I just knew that was just the way I was wired. But yet I also felt different and had this self-loathing and work because I knew as an artist and as an entertainer and all that there was something different about me, and I also wanted the same. Your story, what I love so much about your story is that you are telling my story.
In many ways, just as a male, the one thing we share most in society is that we're both males who were raised in this period. And one thing men generally, and this is changing today, but back then especially, men were always taught you could have your masculinity stripped away from you at any moment. All you have to do is do anything that goes against what being masculine is. And we're going to make you fit into this masculine mold of this is what a male is. And if you like to cook, if you like to do anything in the arts, no, that's gay. That's what women do. That's not okay for men to do that. And women don't, they have their different ways that women have been challenged, but men have always been challenged by each other.
Well, this is history. That's her story.
Exactly.
And so it's not not either or, it's an and gate, and that's what we're learning. And so what we're talking about is his story, the stories of males growing up during this time.
And I'd say male oppression. Just like we have female oppression, there's male oppression in our culture. And so what we are taught to be as men, what you have to do to be okay, you have to walk a very fine path.
Exactly.
And you don't step off that path.
It's very rigid.
Exactly. And that's changed a lot. And that's a great thing, that men could be whatever they want to be, and it doesn't have to be a threat, and women can be whatever they want to be, and that's not a threat.
That's very exciting. And so what happened during this time? So you started dating, and you began and going through college, and so...
Starting to explore who I was for the first time, and realizing, wow, I can actually find someone that I like, and maybe even have a relationship with. Wow. And we were starting to see it in the media, so I believed it might be possible. But then something I didn't know at that time in 1981, which was there was this insidious thing that was starting to appear in the gay community.
Yes.
And if you ever watch movies like, The
Angels
Normal
in
Heart
America.
is one of my favorite movies to watch, because when I see that movie, I thought, that is the story of my life. Now, it takes place in New York in 1981 in Fire Island, but that was also Houston in 1984.
Thank you.
Where it started, where you started hearing these rumors about this disease and it's affecting gays. Oh no, that's society doing that to us. They're trying to create something to attack us again. That's all this is. This can't really be happening. So we could be in our own denial. about what was going on. And then in our denial, we wanted to believe it's only New York, or it's only San Francisco, and it's only those people, or only those who are sluts out there having sex with lots of different people. You know, if you're just in a relationship with someone, you're not at risk. If you're just dating someone, you're not at risk. And so I didn't realize, though, at this time, in 1981, that at the time of my finals in school, I got very ill just before my finals, and I'm trying to study, and I was deathly ill. I was for about 2 weeks and had shingles. I could hardly concentrate. I would high fevers, didn't know what was going on, and it was unusual because I'm not a person who ever gets sick. I mean, it's like I hear other people getting colds and the flu. It's like, I don't get those sort of things. I don't know what it's like to get sick. But there was a time in 1981 where I was deathly ill for like 2 weeks. And of course, today I clearly know what happened at that point. And it was those first two guys, Arturo and Ralph, that I was dating. And as I've learned later, when I moved back to Austin in '96, that both of them had AIDS. And that most likely they had it when I met them and knew them in 1981. And so the very first boyfriends, the very first time I ever had sex, period, I'd gotten infected. And didn't know it because, well, first of all, you can be HIV positive for 5 years, 10 years, maybe even longer without having any side effects of your immune system finally being diminished so much that you get sick, compromised, where you're at that level of AIDS. So I went for many, many years not knowing anything, not thinking anything, and thinking, I'm not at risk. And it was only at the point where now, in the mid-90s, or mid-1980s, I had lots of friends that just I connected with, I had a wonderful life. For the first time, I had friends in my life, people that I was really close to. I had a boyfriend I was in love with. Life couldn't be better. I had a job. I was working for Merrill Lynch. I had finished school and I was going to go into finance. My background was psychology, but I thought I can help people with finance just as much as helping them with other issues. So
of course,
I'll do that. And you can make some good money doing that. And so I have a career. So in 1986, everything was going fine until my best friend, who was my first gay roommate, had moved off to San Francisco in the beginning of 1986. And in February of 1986, well, actually it was in March, he called me to say he was sick. And I thought, what do you mean? He said, it's AIDS. And I thought, you can't have AIDS. You know, first of all, the only people who get AIDS are people who are not